Welcome to the Scientology podcast. This is Dave LaCroix, and we are rolling again. I've got a very special guest today, but first I wanted to just remind you to go to Scientolopedia.org and become a patron. Support this work to bring you great videos and great content. We do a lot of dissemination work on your behalf, as well as if you're brand new to Scientology. I'm sure you have found the site, but become a patron, support us, and help us keep this content rolling. Now, today I have a very special guest. He's a longtime Scientologist. He's got an interesting as hell story to tell. Very interesting career in Scientology. And his name is Merrell Vannier. Merrell, welcome, and thank you for joining the podcast.
Hi, Dave. Pleasure's mine.
So I'm going to just give a highlight of what I know, and I have read your book, and we're going to promote that, by the way. His book is called Arrows in the Dark, and it's a very intriguing and interesting story about the intrigue and the shenanigans, you could say, the history of Scientology. A lot of people, if they've been on Google at all, they've searched and they know that, well, the church was raided by the FBI back in the 70s, and there was all this upheaval and things that went on. Well, we're talking to a man that lived that and has quite a story to tell, and we're going to have the link down below to his book so you can read the inside story yourself. But Merrell, why don't you just maybe give us an overview of your history with the church and a little bit about that, and then we'll dive into different areas, just as wherever the story wants to take us.
Okay. Well, let me see. It started for me in Missouri. I had my first training in 72, and I trained on the standard study tech courses, super lit, primary rundown, and then had auditor training. That's how I started out, with just training to be a class 4 auditor. And briefly, I audited as a professional auditor in St. Louis at the St. Louis Org, where I had my training. And then it was at that point where I was recruited to do some undercover work for B1, which is Bureau 1. It's the intelligence arm of the Guardian's office. And they had a guy from Los Angeles. He was on a mission. He introduced himself to me as Don Alverzo. And I started doing part-time work to help him. And later went on and well, I'll let you introduce.
I'm just curious. You brought up a question that I have is, how do you ever get any feedback or inclination why they selected you? Because I myself, have a bit of a history with working with the GO and so forth. No one ever approached me to be in B1. It was all kind of, you weren't even supposed to know who those guys were, that were in B1. So you ever have anything about you or what you were doing or something you might have said to somebody that indicated for them to recruit you for that kind of thing?
Well, I think for one reason I was a warm body, because there was a mission that Don Alverzo was sent on to St. Louis from Los Angeles, and they needed people to help. So there's a limited number of people. I had gone to law school. I was halfway through law school when I took a leave of absence for my training. That had a lot to do with it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then I guess it was just, I was a known commodity. I had been on staff. I audited. I came there for training. I had all the earmarks, I guess, of somebody who's there legitimately and not an infiltrator to the church. And so I think
which the church, for people that don't know, the church is very sensitive to being infiltrated, and they ultimately were. We can probably maybe speculate or talk about that, but yeah, that makes sense. If you had a law it mentioned you'd gone to law school. I'm sure that was a flag for the guardian's office.
Well, it was, and in fact, I had earlier been recruited to join the Guardian's office in their legal department because of my legal background, and I declined it because it just didn't interest me.
So they went from, okay, he doesn't want to do that, how about this type of thing?
Well, yeah. And I think as a little bit, circumstances changed for me at that time because what prompted the mission to St. Louis from Los Angeles was a series of articles that was written by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And I had read those articles while I was on staff and saw how false they were, how inaccurate. And it upset me. And so by then I was motivated to do something about it, to help in that instance.
Now, I don't know if you mentioned it, but the time frame we're talking about is early 70s, correct?
That's correct. When I first got into the church is 72. So the time I went to, the first course I ever had was in December of 72. And then in 73, I went to St. Louis for training. And I believe it was 74 when I was recruited for that work for the Guardian's office.
Yeah, and so other people kind of put this in a frame of reference too. This was a decade and a half before the Sea Org was even created. So a lot of people know Scientology now by the Sea Org and so forth, but that organization's, the Guardian's office, really managed the church as far as legal, public relations, actually all kinds of internal organizational stuff, as well as the defense of the church. They were, if somebody wrote something in articles and so forth, they were very interested in who, how, and why people were writing critical articles or possibly wanting to infiltrate the church. So the Guardian's office was a defense organization as much as anything else.
Well, correct. I don't know when the Sea Org was formed. I thought it had been formed before then, but the Guardians.
You're right. I'm wrong. Because you're saying 72 and the Sea Org was formed in 67.
Right.
So I had that wrong, but it wasn't in charge of anything as far as management of the church at that point. It was the Guardian's office. It was another number of years before the Sea Org started taking over management.
Yes, and if I recall right, the Guardian's office was formed as an autonomous part of Scientology, I believe, when in 66. I think that's the date of the bulletin. I'm going by memory, but I think it was May 1, 66 or whatever it was. That's when Jane Kimber was appointed guardian. She was stationed in England. Yeah. And so Sea Org was, I think, came right after that. But then you had two powerful arms of the church, the Sea Organization and the Guardian's office, and they were independent to a great extent. Yeah.
So take us on a little bit on your journey. You got recruited to, I don't know, it's kind of, B1 is intelligence gathering type of function, correct?
That's correct. It was intelligence gathering, either overt data collection or covert data collection. And I was tasked to help on both. It started off doing some overt data collection because of my legal background. I knew how to do the legal research and looking into the lawyers who the Post-Dispatch had hired and to find out a little bit more about them. And then I was asked to do some undercover work at the same time. I go through this all in my book. I don't know how much detail you want to get into. I'll let you take this.
I kind of wanted to stick to a high level unless there's some interesting, factoid or specifics, which I know there's plenty of them in the book. But no, I didn't want to try to redo your book here, but it's fascinating to read, and it's anybody interested in sort of the history of Scientology should read your book, because it kind of opens up or lays bare some of the machinations, you could say, that went on, and power struggle. And I know you're going to get to it here in a second, but your, sort of like your whole process of the Guardian's office being dismantled, and you were caught up in that, and you tell that story. But go back to your early stuff and some of the things you might have done that, sort of were highlights for you when you think about, turning points or whatever.
Right. Well, I think a real turning point of doing that work was I was asked to, and I did take a position in a working for a janitor's service that for the building and that housed the attorneys for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And the whole purpose, once I got the job, was obviously to gain access to that office and to those files of those attorneys. And specifically what was looked for is the evidence who was pulling their chain, who was directing them, because it was suspected that there was a higher authority perhaps, or some intelligence agency that had provoked the false series. This was clearly an attack for somebody who was present there and a member of the church at the time inside. What was said about the church and the goings on in the church were completely false and fabricated. So it was clearly an attack. And so the question was, who was the source of that attack?
I'm just curious, who thought up this idea to get hired on as a janitor in the building where the attorneys that were attacking the church worked? That's a,
yeah, it was a very risky, lame brain idea looking back on it. At the time, though, what started it off, the guy, Don Alverzo, my handler, got the idea that I could take a job with that law firm, which I did apply for, and I got turned down. In fact, they suspected that I was a Scientologist, and the reason I know that is because after I did the job interview and I got back, Don advised me that that law firm had called the church asking for me, and the receptionist, who hadn't been briefed, said he's not in right now.
Oh,
So that was so then he turned around after that, and well, I got another idea, which I didn't think I'd ever get hired anyway. I was only a year out of law school. But he said, I have another idea. There's a janitor company that they have an opening in that same building, which I thought was risky as hell, considering what had just happened.
yeah.
But I was game, and went ahead and applied and got the job.
You were young and dumb. Why not go along with it, right?
Right.
I mean, it's fascinating that, a church would, have this organization designed to gather intelligence and investigate their opponents. Of course, Scientology and LRH are totally unique in a lot of ways, but just, it's fascinating that this was going on. And I'm sure, we'll talk about other operations and so forth, but just to, to grasp that, hey, I'll hire on as a janitor and maybe I can gain access and get some intel on our opponents. It's pretty wild.
But it worked. It did work. And by the way, we weren't the first organization and even church to have an intelligence organization. And I might just bring up the Jesuits.
Oh.
But anyway, so I took the job. That was a highlight. I did gain access, and it was a tremendous success in terms of gaining access. And of course, it made Don look awfully good because he was on mission to obtain this information. I was never told what was in the files and information that I obtained and turned over, or at least gained access to.
Did you
And
just copy the files or did you
no,
actually
no,
respond with them?
no, and there's a little story in the book. It's a little anecdote where Don wanted me to copy them, and I refused because, and this is very significant for what later happened in Washington, D.C., but because by copying, I knew that by copying, from my legal background, I knew that by copying the paper on their Xerox machines, that I was stealing copy paper. And I knew that was, if you gained the access to the office and then did that, that would amount to a burglary, which was a felony, and I refused to do it.
Smart.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I allowed Don to gain access because I was able to bypass the security of the building, and with perfect timing, I was be at the door to allow him in when nobody was around and looking, and then it enabled him to go. So there was one night where we did a go, all systems go, and he was coming up, getting files, taking them out, and somebody else was helping him. They take him down to a copy center or somewhere. I don't know where they copied him. And then they would bring them back. We had to do that all within a few hour period.
It was like 2 o'clock in the morning or something, or?
Yeah, something like that. And it was the time they were done. It's like, I think they started earlier than 2, but by the time they were done, it was getting close to the end of the shift, starting to get light. And it was very nerve wracking for me on the inside, and it was tense. And I try to express that in the book, convey that feeling. And but that was a huge success, and so that was why I was then a hero for doing that sort of thing. And Don then asked me if I would go to law school, finish my law school. They wanted me to do that. He had plans, ideas, no specific plans, but ideas of what a guy with a law degree and admitted to licensed to practice law could do as an undercover operative. So that's what I was doing. I just basically sent off to finish law school, and which I did, and just waited for a call.
Well, I'm sure you were a hero on up the line, because I know how those things, they reverberate up the channels in Scientology. I'm sure it made it to Mary Sue, and I imagine LRH even heard about it. Did you ever get any feedback to that effect, that they knew about that operation?
No, not specifically who knew about it, but I knew that it went to fairly high levels, and that was I was very much well thought of for that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was a coup, you could say.
It was, and if you step back and take a 40,000-mile view, the chances of that even happening, to get in there and get the information that you're looking for with such limited resources, those are the kind of things that really shock people, especially the authorities, when they learned about not only that did the church have an intelligence arm, but it was very effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard, I forget what the exact compliment was, but I know that it's been said that it was one of the best intel organizations in the world. So
right. There was some analysis, it was somewhere in the CEAS documents, I believe, that was found that somebody rated it second only to Mossad in terms of intelligence, other than the CIA.
Yeah, well, I cheer that, because I see the whole, Scientolopedia is devoted to the history of Scientology, and I've done a lot, interviewed people, studied it. But the subject itself from the very beginning was a benign subject. It's just there to help people learn how to help themselves, basically improve their lives and so forth. And at the same time, there's this parallel track of incredible, vicious, nasty work being done in mind control, MK Ultra, all that nasty business. Yet here are the churches getting attacked by the major media and press and hidden sources. So the fact that the church fought back and got the goods on those hidden sources and defended itself, to me, I go, hooray for our team. You know, whereas a lot of other people view it as, oh my God, what a horrible organization to be spying on, you know, the government and so forth. But anyway, that's my little editorial in the midst of your story. You lived it, so I'm cheering for you now.
Well, my editorial would be that's fine to have an intelligence agency or organization, but it should be nothing illegal done. And that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
That's where it went wrong. And I want to point out, and the book talks about it, but who started that? And later, I would later learn, if we were to skip forward, we might get to it later. But Don Alverzo was the person who first instigated the GO to engage in criminal conduct.
That I 100% agree. Crossing that line, breaking the law was the beginning of the end for the GO and opening up the door for the takeover of the church, in my opinion. So
right, I agree with that, and that's why a question has to be asked about Alverzo. Was he an agent provocateur sent in? Because the history of a lot of organizations like the Black Panthers and many others is that that would start off as a good do-gooder organization and would be infiltrated with FBI or FBI informants, who then take the organization down an illegal path, which then they can be controlled or destroyed at will.
Yeah, good point. All right, well, so let's, whatever their high points or just a brief overview of your career.
The next high point would be that I was in Kansas City practicing law, because I'd already graduated and become licensed, when I got a call December 75, close to Christmas.
Excuse me, did you say Kansas City?
Yes, that's where I went to law school, Kansas City.
All right.
Yeah, so I moved back from St. Louis back across the state to Kansas City to finish law school. Mm-hmm. And then I got this call in December 75 asking me to come to Florida. Now, you were a Scientologist, and you will recall that it was widely disseminated in Scientology organization that the church had created a flag land base, but nobody knew where. It was confidential. That was all the buzz. People, where is it? And some places tropical and warm all year round. And so that's when I learned where it was, because Don had called up and said, "Hey, I need you here in Clearwater, Florida." And he revealed to me that was where the flag land base had landed.
Yeah, that was about the time LRH came ashore. He got off the ship and went to Florida, California, different places as he was sort of settling in.
Right. So I took that. Well, first of all, I had to become licensed, so I took the Florida bar exam, and then moved to Florida. And
did they assign you? You were still like contracted or GO staff at this point?
No, I never was GO staff at that time until like late 79. But at that period, no, I had never become staff. And And at one time or once or twice, I was asked to join a GO contract, but each time I declined. And but I was just helping out as a volunteer.
Okay. No
And
compensation, just your sense of purpose and so forth.
exactly, I was just helping out as totally volunteer and no payment and no promised exchange of any kind.
Well, very similar. I mean, I didn't work for B1, but I was what's called a GAS member, Guardian Auxiliary Staff, and I worked on several projects for them and got to know some of the people, Henning Health, and people around. This was in California, so got familiar with a little bit of the flavor of the Guardian's office, and just volunteered. Got just because.
What's that? What time period was that? When you
Well, I was a
did?
little earlier. It was 72, 3, 4. That, well, maybe up until 75. I can't remember when the last little project I worked on, but it was very part-time, very just occasional. Go to some event or do this and that. We had the church, people don't know, was actually a recognized counseling agency for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So I went out and counseled families that were buying a house on the HUD program, on just basically financial management, how to handle their finances so they could keep their payments and make their payments and keep the house.
Right.
Just, but, imagine today, the Church of Scientology being an official, counseling organization of a government entity. It's probably would not happen, I wouldn't think.
No, not at all.
So the church did some cool things. I mean, the Guardian's office, like that, getting us recognized by the Housing and Urban Development Department, and other, getting articles in the press and fighting back. And I mean, it was a spirited fighting group. And you might not say, well, that's not very spiritual, but what the hell? It's not a turn the other cheek type of organization, it's not. And I don't think that any group that came under the type of attack that the Church of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard came under would have survived had they just been a meek and mild and turn the other cheek type of organization.
Right.
So anyway, any other highlights there in the next period of time that you think of?
I'd like to digress just for a second, if you don't mind. One of the things that I think needs to be known, to be put in context, though, is that when the church, well, way before it was a church, but when Hubbard was teaching and people and training people to do Dianetic auditing, and then he would train others and they would go out and do Dianetic auditing, that brought on a lot of attacks. And those attacks were many years later to the psychiatry arm of the AMA, American Medical Association, and into the intelligence community, because I'm going to be talking about that in a little bit, but for one of my next highlights. But when people were practicing Dianetics, back in the early 50s, they were being attacked, and some of them were even put in jail, but they were ordered not to practice Scientology, or Dianetics at the time. It's called Dianetics. And they were ordered not to do that because they weren't licensed professionals. They weren't licensed psychotherapists.
Right.
And that's what led to the church being formed as a religious organization, because then they could avoid all of that licensing requirements for mental health counseling that they were being attacked for. So there was a long history that goes way back with the church. If to survive, it almost had to come up with some means, and just not go the direction that when it went the criminal direction, but it had to defend itself. And that's one of the reasons it was so successful. And the success it had in the mid to late 60s and early 70s, the organizations, the churches were filled to the brim. And that's partly a product of the type of work the Guardian's Office did, because before the Guardian's Office was formed, that work was done through private investigators and PR people and different things like that. So that context, I just wanted to make sure that was there. I don't know how many or whether your audiences are completely familiar with that.
Well, I try to preach that similar, and I put it out in my own podcasts and so forth, in groups, Facebook groups, etc. But yeah, I'm tracking with you 100%. And people, it's hard to imagine the environment was so oppressive in a lot of ways to any new idea or anybody touching the field of psychotherapy or mental health. So the church becoming a church was a smart strategic move. It's also true. I mean, if there's anything that warrants religious exemption or religious recognition, it's a subject that's dealing with man as a spiritual being. So it was brilliant strategically, but it's also very true.
Right. And the AMA went after not just Scientology or Dianetists, but it went after chiropractic, if you remember, and that for decades is almost any type of alternative treatment. And in fact, at one time there was a big push to regulate supplements, nutritional supplements.
Oh, I tell the story of where the FDA raided health food stores back in the 70s and to take honey off the shelves. True story. They did. And we have in Scientolopedia, if anybody wants to look it up, there's an article and a number of articles on this topic, but one, the world L. Ron Hubbard lived in. It's under L. Ron Hubbard's biography, but it gives a lot of detail about, from J. Edgar Hoover, the AMA, the FDA, IRS, all of these agencies, and the attacks on chiropractic and, like you say, vitamins. So, it's woven into all of that environment that the church had to defend itself. Hence, Merrell Vannier comes in on the scene.
Yeah, so you have a therapy that works, and that drew a lot of attention, and that so you could never say that Scientology is a normal organization or what survival mechanisms it had to create to survive. That was things like that, investigations, PR, all of that was necessary to survive.
Yeah. So what do you look at again as moving up on the time track, another milestone or career?
Okay. Well,
changing
you mentioned J. Edgar Hoover, so I'm going to let's segue right through to what I did next. I worked. I got a job. At first, it was kind of temporary. I mean, I was hired, but for administrative reasons, my bar license hadn't got stamped yet, and so I was working at the state attorney's office. Now that's like a district attorney's office in a lot of places. And so I was working there daily, and when something next happened, and it was, again, pretty strange and unexpected, but the guy I was working for, I was basically doing gopher work. And the guy I was taking instructions from each day, his desk was swamped, and he would keep passing things off to me. And one of the things he passed off to me was a request from the St. Petersburg Police Department, Intel Department. Didn't even know they had an intelligence division separate from the police department. But that was passed off to me. And he said, that job, he said, go up, research, find out about the freedom. They have a freedom of information request. He didn't say from whom. Just find out what the requirements are and then call this guy over there and talk to him. And which I did. I went and did the research, and then I called the guy and I said, so what's going on? And they said, well, we have this information here and we've got a freedom of information request and we don't want to turn over the information. I said, okay, so is there an active investigation? No. I just went down the checklist of when you can withhold it legally.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, got down the list. He said, you've got to turn it over. And he said, but we don't want to. And I said, what do you mean you don't want to? Why are you calling us? Well, you're our attorney. So anyway, I suggested that it was at that point, though, he mentioned that it was from the Church of Scientology, the request from the church, something I knew nothing about, which surprises some people, but the Guardian's office was very departmentalized, and I was doing B1 work, and it was very secretive. So I didn't know what else anyone else was doing. I only knew what I was told, and I was told very little, only enough to do my job. But anyway, it was from the Church of Scientology, and which freaked me out in a way because I'm thinking this is too coincidental that I could just stumble upon this, and I didn't know what was there. But I said, well, perhaps I need to come by and look at what you've got so I can get creative. Because he was wanting a loophole. He says, isn't that what lawyers are for, to give us a loophole? Anyway, and when I went over there, what I found was what I recognized to be, there's files from what they call the District 6 investigation. And that District 6 included FBI, the state attorney's office, not the building I was working in, but headquarters of the state attorney's office for that district, and IRS, all these different agencies, but mainly FBI. And it was very clear that Gabe Cazares, the mayor of Clearwater, and there's another reporter, a couple of reporters, were working with the FBI. In other words, they were stirred up or instigated into attacking the church. And all the time they knew it was a Church of Scientology, but they were promoting to the media that it was some mystery organization that bought it. Who is it? Asking who. They knew who it was. They had the mayor asking, making public statements. Who are these people? And the whole thing was set in motion by the FBI, and I had the documents in front of me.
Wow.
And the thing I need to point out, this was 1976. The year before, in 1975, the FBI was telling Congress that they no longer had their domestic intelligence, what they called COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO for short. And so they were telling Congress it didn't happen. They closed it down and it no longer occurred. But here, 1 year later, I ran into it. And that was when I came down to Florida. The first thing I said, well, what are we doing here? And he said, we want to find out who is behind the attacks on the church and the flagged land base. And there in front of me was the answer.
Wow.
And these documents that they were never going to turn over, because another thing he told me, the captain who ran that intelligence department said, we're not turning them over. They wanted a legal reason not to do that when they didn't have a legitimate one. So I was still only a year out of law school and had taken the bar exam even just earlier that year in Florida. I knew how to cram. I knew how to memorize in a short period of time. And I was left alone with the files while I did that. And I just memorized. I just went through it all and went through it backwards and forward until I thought I could, convey what was in those records accurately. And then I left. And I went back to the guy I reported to and gave him the problem. I said, hey, these guys have got these files that they should be turning over, but they don't want to turn over. And the lawyer I was working for would just get on the phone, call him back, say, you got to do it. And I said, well, I don't think I'm the guy that should be doing that, because I actually am technically not yet an assistant state attorney. And he said, well, that's just paperwork. But I held my ground. And anyway, I got the information. That was it. I lost my job because now all of a sudden people were asking questions. They knew they'd been infiltrated. I don't know if they knew I was a Scientologist at that point. But I was given a reason that I shouldn't be coming back. But anyway, I had the information. That was a key moment, because it influenced me to do something later that I would not otherwise have done. And that is because I knew now that, well, we have a situation that we have going on in present time where you had the 7th floor of the FBI just lying and even helping on this whole Russian dossier that was featured in the 2016 presidential election. And so that's what I knew, that it had something very rotten in Denmark. It was very bad, it's very dishonest and illegal. And I had asked, in fact, I felt so strongly about that I asked and requested that the church blow my cover so we could get this out. Is that important?
Wow.
And that was decided that not to do that, because I thought it would blow the whole thing up. Hey, you asked me what to do. I mean, that was within a few weeks of I got down there. I hadn't been there very long at all. I'd only been on that job a week or two. When that happened, you wanted to find out who's behind this. Here's the answer. Now, there are a lot of reasons, and they gave them, and I agree with them. There are a lot of reasons not to take action at that point. For one thing, those documents I saw, they're not in my hand, and it's just me reporting on it. And I was a biased person, in terms of being working for one party.
Right.
But anyway, that's in other words, what the St. Pete Intel Division, and they later did this in another matter, could just say, no, we didn't have any files like that. We didn't have any documents like that. But I want to mention one other thing. One of the comments was that when I was asking about these files before I went over there, I was on the phone and I says, so, I mean, what's the deal here? And he says, well, we were just handed these documents because it wasn't part of an investigation. I said, well, if it wasn't part of an investigation, what are you doing with them? He said, we were handed these documents and told to bury them. So for all these reasons, I knew nothing would be done about this, but this was the evidence. I knew it. And that was a key moment of my activities in Florida.
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, the 2016 FBI thing, and I'm sure that, that experience of how official government wants to treat anything that might not be in their favor has, you see that a lot these days and can read between the lines as a result of learning that lesson that
Right.
all those years ago. So just in the interest of time, your career, you were you sort of coming upon these treasure troves of information, and how do you go from there? What's the rest of your the book about, and what's the rest of your guardian's office career look like?
Yeah, well, the book just goes through what I did next, where I ended up representing the mayor. He had a case against the church. They had a case against him. And I represented him, not for the purpose of doing anything on his case, because there are a lot of details and I go over in the book why we knew that wouldn't happen. And but it was mainly to then use that as a calling card. I represent the mayor, who's an outspoken critic of the church, therefore doors open. And with those doors open, then I did a number of other things, which I go over in my book. It's really interesting when you're on the other side and you have the credentials of being an anti-Scientologist, what people in the government will show you or tell you that are just completely wrong, but they trust you. And I was able to find that information, which helped. There's a number of things that helped the church in what it was doing. And
so I presume you're writing reports, you're giving reports to the guardian's office, and they're going wherever they go in the church, that type of thing, right?
Right. In fact, there's a time, people have been around a while might know that where the Immigration Naturalization Service they deported, or at least had a deportation order, that all non-U.S. citizens who were on staff at the Flag Land Base had to leave. Well, that was 75% of their staff. And
I never heard about that.
Oh, you didn't know that? Okay. That was something, not what I was told, that came from the old man. It's a phrase that was used, but meaning Hubbard, that if they lost that case, they would lose the Flag Land Base. And if they lost the Flag Land Base, they would lose Scientology. And if you know the backstory, I'm not going to go into it, about the church. It was having problems with its ships at sea, which it basically had to land because it was kept running into different problems with the State Department, other things. So I met with the Immigration Naturalization Service, for example, and I was given all the files again. And
this is that your status as an employee for a law firm?
No, this was just by virtue of the fact that I was the lawyer for Gabe Cazares.
Okay.
I was given entry because there are people willing to help, even government agencies and government personnel were willing to help defeat the church in litigation.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, as far as they're concerned.
So anyway, I went and met with the guy, and I was greeted with open arms and showed what all they had on that case against the church. And it was with that I was told, because I take this information down, and like I talk about in the book, I memorize as much as I can, and then I quickly would go to a place. In this case, I went to the Tampa Library and just download it, by writing with handwriting everything that I remembered. And then I turned that information in, and then a week or two later, the case was dismissed against the church. And what I was told happened was that the information in there, and there's way too much for me to even remember the details now, but so I don't even know what the information was that prompted them, but whatever it was, they told me that they had discovered who did the initial order, who's the one who put that in motion, that case against the church in motion. And they isolated that person, learned about him, and went to his boss. They sent a PR team and overturned the whole thing.
Now, do you know who that is today? Did you find out who that
No,
was?
I don't. I don't remember that. I just remember it was in some office and I can't even remember where it was located, but it was some INS office. It all originated from one office and one particular person who he wasn't at the top of the food chain, but he was a pretty high position. But so anyway, so those are the kind of things that those are legitimate Intel products.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what happened. And then the next thing that significant was in June, I guess it was, or July of 77, I was contacted. We had a secret way of connecting up, and let's go meet at a certain place. And I was told that, and I'd heard it on the radio. I heard it on the radio first. The church was raided. The Los Angeles Guardian's office was raided, and I believe the DC church. And all I heard were the news reports. Then later I get contacted, and then I met and said, "We want you to leave. We want you to get out of here. You go anywhere in the world. We want you to leave." It's just that sudden. And I said, "Well, what the hell's going on?" And I was told that, well, it's raided. Well, you could hear on the radio had to do with infiltrating the government offices. None of that I knew at the time, no details, but there was a grand jury was started somewhere. Anyway, I was hustled out of town.
The shit hit the fan, you could say.
Yeah, it hit the shan. It did. And so I had to uproot my family, and we really liked it there in Clearwater. I had a good job, and when I wasn't doing this volunteer work, I was practicing law. I was became the head of this as a 10-man law firm. I headed up their civil litigation department. So, and I was quite successful. I was, winning cases, bring in a lot of money for the firm. So I really liked that part of it. And I hated to leave.
Well, I'm just going to interject. A lot of people, when you hear the Church of Scientology was raided, a lot of people have been to the Celebrity Center in Hollywood, which is the big French chateau building right in the middle of Hollywood. But at that time, it wasn't an organization delivering Scientology. Well, maybe it had moved by 77, I'm not sure, but the top two floors of that were Guardian's office, the 6th and 7th floor. And that's where the FBI raided, right in the smack dab in the middle of Hollywood, right now where all the celebrities hang out in the Rose Garden and they do their special big gala events there. That's the infamous place where the GO ran their operations out of, and that's where the FBI visited.
Was it there? Oh, but then the B1 was over at the Big Blue.
Oh, was it? Well, that I don't know, because nobody told me where B1 was located. But
yeah, it was. They called the Horseshoe. It's on the Lebanon Hall, right below that at the bottom, and it was. I didn't know that then, but later in '79, I moved to California and became part of it. But that's where the offices were down there, and the guys talked to me about the raid when it was raided and things like that. So, but they did have everything else except for B1 over in those top two floors, that you mentioned.
I just thought people might find that interesting, that now is, it's become an iconic Scientology iconic landmark, and to have had, I won't even call it checkered past, but have that bit of history located there is a little bit interesting. So now you went to California, and you said you joined the Guardian's office, and I know this is covered in the book, but what was your general feeling of the organization you were working for? Were you happy? Did you like it? Were you suspicious, or were you cautious? Were you worried that this was going to lead to trouble? What was the atmosphere like?
Well, first of all, it's a brief stay in Canada. I went back to Missouri, where my folks lived, in the St. Louis area, where I'm back now. And I practiced law in Missouri for a little while. And it was because of the legal cases. I felt some responsibility, even though I didn't know what happened in DC. I didn't know what, about the government infiltrations there. But I felt some responsibility. I had a legal degree. I was successful in law. It was partly because of that I thought I should help get out of that mess. I helped them the best they could get out of that mess.
Mhm.
So that was part of it. And then by then I started writing. And I knew that Hollywood is where, if you wanted to have success in writing or anything like that, to go to Hollywood. So I left California with those two purposes in mind, and ended up helping the church. I went on staff in B1, and then it was, at some point it was taken over. So I was there for that. But my feeling was, when I looked into it, I started seeing details once I got out there and working on the case of what was done, some of the things that were done. And then at one point I was given, this before I got accepted, but when I was out there and I was volunteering to help sort out these cases, I laughed because it's a small room, but it's more like a big closet, and there are all these legal boxes. The church had about, I don't know, 5 or 6 cases against Paulette Cooper, and it was such a mess. I volunteered to straighten out their files, and so they're in a working order. And so it's in the process of learning that, and also the papers were carrying more stories about documents that were obtained in the raid, and I started seeing all that went on, and it's like it was some bad stuff.
Now, this is where the church crossed the line and went into illegal activity.
Way over the line, and a lot of these things, like even going into the government buildings and how they did that, and with false identifications and different things. But what I said earlier, the papers, copying government documents on government computers. That's where the burglary charges came from. Which and Don, it turns out, was involved in that project. And I had told him just a couple years earlier, you can't do that. That's a felony. And I wasn't willing to commit a felony. So anyway, that I learned all this stuff, and then I got into staff, and I was helping out. What my idea was just to help. One of the things is that that when I arrived, there was a different feeling. There was a feeling of contrition among many, and especially you could tell it coming down from Mary Sue, where she became a real stickler for not doing anything illegal, and to basically correct those things that had come out that were bad. And
Wow.
and she even made sure I was posted in a position where I saw all intelligence for the United States came across my desk, and any intelligence operation before it was approved had to go through me. And that was my job. So that was one of the things I went there to do, was to help them out, help them fix this. You have a organization, you have this technology, which is very beneficial, but you got to do things right, and or that could end up taking the organization down. So I was very gratified with the role I was given, and the fact that the Guardian's office, Mary Sue in particular, was willing to fix things.
I'm so
And
glad to hear you say that, because I've been a big fan of Mary Sue's for years. I mean, I didn't meet her or work directly with her or anything when I was doing my volunteer work for the Guardian's office, but I liked being on those lines. I knew the people that were connected and on the lines. Anyway, I just had a good feeling about her, the way
right.
LRH talked about her and everything. And but I'm curious, she, at least when at the end she was living in LA. I don't know if she was living in LA at that time you're talking about, in the late 70s, I guess, maybe early
Yeah,
80s.
I do. She was living there. Yes.
Did you get to meet her? Did you ever talk with her directly yourself?
No, I never met her, never talked with her directly. I through her communicator, she sent him, and I'd have messages from her and send messages back, but never directly.
You know, we have these canards or these lies that are spread about Scientology, and Mary Sue gets people toss out, well, she went to jail. Well, yeah, but what's the whole context and what's the rest of the story? To hear you say that that was her attitude about not crossing the line, not doing things illegal, just bolsters my admiration for her more. And she was instrumental. She made a comment to LRH earlier on in the 60s when they had disconnection, fair game. What was the other? Anyway, these kind of onerous
checking.
policies. What?
Sec checking.
I still didn't hear you.
Sec checking.
Sec checking.
Yeah,
Anyway,
you said the fair game and disconnection.
Connection.
Weren't
They
you
were. Yeah. Anyway, she made a comment to LRH, and this was I got from Janice Gillum, that it was her comment that we don't need those things anymore. We've got the technology. We handle people with our technology. And that prompted him to do Ron's Journal 68, I think it is, where he canceled Disconnection, fair game. So, I think she's been, like they say, behind every successful man, there's a great woman. I think she was that to LRH, in a lot of ways.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that third thing is disconnection. This 68, Ron's Journal 68, he canceled disconnection, fair game, and sex checking.
Yeah. So let's just, I want to tie in a little bit with current events, or the current church, but because, the theory of the case, I'm not the only one that has this theory that the church was infiltrated and taken over, because we all know the dog's breakfast that the Church of Scientology is today under David Miscavige. Now, the theory, nobody has documents and so forth that I know of, just sort of tangential, little bit of information. And by the way it behaves, it seems like it was infiltrated and taken over. You were there during that evolution of when the Sea Org is, getting its mitts into and sort of shuffling the Guardian's office out of the way and taking over its former power. What's your opinion on all of that, and my theory that the church was in fact infiltrated by bad hats and taken over?
Right. Well, I was there. I was there when it was taken over, when the Guardian's office was taken over. In fact, I have a chapter in my book about Bill Franks when he confronted Jane Kimber and in her office about trying to get her to turn over control of the Guardian's office. Mary Sue had sent down a communique to me to be there present as a witness. So I witnessed that attempted takeover. Then a couple of days later it was taken over. And so I went through all that. I guess I'm trying to figure out how to truncate it and get it into a short summary. But I go through this in my book about how I started seeing things that, first of all, emanated from a particular area. I didn't know David Miscavige at the time. I never heard his name. But I saw things coming from Norm Starkey, who worked in that area with him, I later learned. And I started seeing things and started looking. And I started with a couple others, another lawyer from Britain, and we started comparing notes. And Mary Sue was wanting to get control back after it had been turned over. And I was asked to help on that. And I did help to a certain extent. But I was also looking out for the health of the organization, not to return her to power. But anyway, throughout the course of that, it became more and more obvious to me that from this central control point, there was something very, well, it made me think of Intel, that there's the feelings of Intel, what was going down, the propaganda, the policies that were changed in terms of not writing articles about in Freedom Magazine about the FBI. There's a lot of haranguing of GO members for taking on something against the FBI. There's a lot of things that just, pardon me.
Sorry, but that's a key point there. You saw a shift where no longer would the church put forth, attacks or anything negative about the FBI.
Right. In fact, it's the very first meeting after it's taken over, and there were, some people were gone. All of a sudden, they kept me, but everybody that was kept had to go through, were herded around, and you had to go through security checks. You had to go through writing up OWs, which is anything you've done wrong. I had to write up every little detail of anything I did for the GO. But there was a meeting that Bill Franks was the executive director international at that time, and he called a meeting at GO very early on after the takeover, and we're all corralled into this large room, but we filled the room, and he went off. He was slamming the GO. Now, he did say for criminality. I agree with him on that, but he was also slamming them for taking on the FBI. In the Freedom Magazine, there used to be articles written by the PR department, which oftentimes they were fed information from B1, but it was talked about the FBI and all of its dirty shenanigans. And he was just haranguing us. Don't do that. That's the way we survive, is by making good relations. He cited one policy, you've probably heard it about, to have good relations with the local community or whatever. So there was a real definite effort there. And then I got involved in some civil cases. I was selected for a very high honored post. It's called Mission All Clear. There is a unit put together. Any case in which the founder, L. Ron Hubbard, was involved, that case was in there.
Yeah.
And I was, along with the head of it, Kathy O'Gorman, KO, I was, my approach was, because I knew what happened in Clearwater. I saw those documents. I knew they had caused or put in motion those attacks on the church. So I knew they were behind that. And so in what I wanted to try to bring into those cases was that sort of thing about finding out the wrongdoing, the FBI, and exposing it. And I started getting pushback, or pushback came to our group. And again, I just started noting all these things. I also was always mindful of what the GO did wrong, and that it was still going through reform and needed reform. But we also were, it was during this time, I'm kind of changing topics a little bit, but it was during this time we had these meetings, but this is where we would be herded together. And we did what's called fourth dynamic engram run, or third dynamic engram running, which is basically, by running engram, you're talking about what's happened in the past, as you know. But we were talking about what happened. Where did the GO go off the rails? And everybody was invited to be extremely candid and with no consequences, just what happened. And then we would share our notes. And out of those meetings, it became very clear that Don Alverso was the very first person to instigate criminal conduct by Guardian's Office personnel.
Mm.
And because it was so successful, obviously, if you can break and enter someplace and gather information, you can get stuff that's you can't find otherwise. And so it was very productive. And when something's productive, you know, the stats each week, now you got to better yourself for the next week. It was so productive, and people got so validated for the information they were getting that it became commonplace, and it became part of the culture. But that's the way agent provocateurs work. Now, I've looked into that, I've read about it, I studied it at the time. So as soon as that came out, that he was the guy, I put that together with the other notes I had, which is that we had been infiltrated and had gone off the rails. And then Miscavige comes in to knock out the GO. And I just kind of put everything together that there's something rotten here. There's a Miscavige or whoever there. I didn't know Miscavige at the time, but whoever was there at that inner core, there was some connection to the intelligence community. And, you know, some of these things are hard to put in words because you would know as a trained auditor, there are things besides words being spoken, there's that you can perceive, ambiance, different things, or you can, and that's the feeling I got. I could feel these, same thing when I was in Florida working undercover, going up against the FBI, that sort of thing. I could feel these same intentions and attitudes or emotions, whatever you might want to call it. And these were the things that concerned me greatly, that it had been infiltrated and that the person who was in control cut some sort of deal with the FBI. And I had these notes, and I was almost afraid to talk about it because I'm wondering, man, am I just speculating here, or is this conspiracy theorist in me come out real?
Well, you get gaslighted whenever you bring that up with certain people, you know. So
anyway, so I stupidly wrote together all my notes and conclusions, and just taking a look. Could I be missing something? Could I be just got something wrong here? And I had all these notes, and I put them in my desk. And my desk was locked. Went out to lunch one day, came back. There was a lock, but my key didn't work. And there was a sign on the door, report to HCO, Hubbard Communications Office. That's like H&R in a company, ethics. So that was the end of my tenure there.
Wow. So you never saw those documents again. You never got them back or anything.
No, I never got them back. And so I left with just my conclusions, and which were, you know, I wasn't able to nail it down exactly what happened. I can speculate. I can tell you what I think if you're interested, but
well, let's just do that for a minute. We'll wrap up, or we'll sort of wind down with our speculations. I know that you're very keen on current events and all of these kind of, you know, having to read between the lines and take bits and scraps and sometimes esoteric information and put a picture together is, you know, it takes high intelligence to really make sense of some things that we see in the current world. and the history of Scientology. And there's so many liars and cheaters and people that have, you know, their agendas. They're thrown into the mix. But people like, you know, it's been said that people like Karen de la Carriere and Mike Render and Marty Rathbun, they've all had contact with, you know, intelligence organizations. So they're on the suspects list, and they're on supposedly on the outside now. Internally, we got David Miscavige comes out of nowhere and has all this power and all this certainty that, you know, he can take the church in certain directions. Well, that's suspicious. You know, where is a young guy like that that's, you know, never finished high school, doesn't even have a high school diploma? How do they get so, you know, so sort of energized to go in certain directions and be successful in certain things? So these are questions, and we're left floundering in the field. But I'll defer to your speculations now rather than rant on my own.
Well, okay. Well, I want to take up one thing in terms of Miscavige, because I also had a lot of questions, and I had asked people. I later interviewed a lot of people who worked with him and around him, like Terry Gillen, for example. He was a driven. He is a driven person. He is a alpha male. He's very. He would get things done. One of the things Terry once told me, I said, "Why did he get rise to so much power with LRH?" And she said, "Well, he would volunteer and he would do missions where other people were a little skittish on, and he would get results." And so he kind of a no back off guy. She even told me an example once where he stood up to LRH, where LRH wanted him to step down from behind the camera because he'd made a mistake, and Miscavige refused to do it. Said, "No, I'm going to fix this. I'll get it right." And LRH finally backed down and said, "Okay, let's go." So, you know, he has a lot of ingredients and traits, personality traits that you see on display. What you don't see, though,
psychopathic, I would say, but
you know, well, yeah, okay, I could see that too, and but I do think that there's a key time. He was power driven. I think we can agree on that. He's megalomania. It's just to be in charge and be in control, power. That was his drive, basic drive. So we see that it's on display. Let's accept it and let's take a look at that, because and put it in the context of the situation back then, where you had LRH on the run. And he was hid out. Miscavige knew where he was. The FBI was wanting to go after him too, not just Mary Sue and the others. And there were lawsuits out there. And he wanted the control. How do you get the control? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to take down the GO, because it's not going to work. If you're controlling the Sea Org, that can work if you get rid of the GO. But you got to get rid of the GO. You got to get rid of Mary Sue Hubbard. And it's what I think probably occurred was that he had contact with the FBI, different people in the intelligence community, people who represented the FBI at the highest level, and brokered a deal. Basically, he would take down the GO. We would not go after the FBI or anything like that. We're going to stop all that. And so you'll get what you want. You want Mary Sue down, the GO down anyway. There's not going to be any more intelligence against the government, and where we infiltrate it. And you leave Hubbard alone. Because with Hubbard there, he had protection. He knew he had an in with Hubbard. He had a plan of action to take over control. He knew Hubbard wasn't in the greatest of health back then, and that soon everything would be his if he played the cards right. So I think it's more that kind of a deal that went on.
No cash changed hands, you don't think?
No, I don't think so. And I think even the the FBI would be glad to have a guy. If you look at other places where they take over organizations and install a puppet head, you can see that they want people who are controllable. They know what their motives are. His motives was to control and have power. Fine, if he's going to leave us alone, let him have his power and do his crazy stuff. We're not worried about it. And meanwhile, you can unleash other things. You can unleash other intelligence assets to attack the church, and especially you can attack them for the crazy stuff he does. So you can have it both ways. You can really micromanage that whole thing without him being a witting agent. And I don't think he was a witting agent.
You could have someone that supposedly has left the church and is attacking the church, and yet them be an agent on their behalf at the same time, type of thing.
Right, exactly. And to drive one of the things that's happening, if you listen to some of these critic boards, is they lump everything together. Whatever Miscavige does or whatever policy he has, it's Scientology. Whatever the Church of Scientology. The church is an institution, but it's all Scientology. Everything's all lumped into one. And of course, sanity is the exact opposite of lumping everything together. When you lump everything together, it's A equal A equal A. And when you break it out and look in nuances and you can recognize differences and similarities, then you have sanity. So you have people out there very actively. You can just see it, call a spade, just look at it. They're lumping it all together. And that's by design. And that's very much the product of the intelligence community. Not to say that they're in the line because are involved, but it appears that way.
Well, I fought a battle of against the narrative. In fact, I created a recent podcast I've uploaded called Flipping the Script, but it's against this narrative and this lumping the church and Scientology, the subject, altogether. Scientolopedia makes a clear, stake in the ground that it's about the subject of Scientology, not the church. I'd love your stories, and I'm going to remind people we're going to have links to your book and everything. I wish we had more time to go into some current events. Maybe we'll just think of a good excuse to do that, and tie some of this into the current political environment. But I'm curious, the last question that I have, if there's anything else you want to bring up, it's fine. But, when you look at the future of Scientology, people say, where is it going? What's it going to be? Is it going to last? The field of Scientology, it's scattered, disorganized. I mean, there's a lot of practitioners that are doing things, but no organization of all these field practitioners. I'd like to hear your take on how you view all that and where you think it might be going.
Yeah, well, as you know, I also founded Religious Liberty League, and I helped a couple of organizations become religious organizations as vehicles for an independent church. I helped create those and obtain their tax exempt status, but it doesn't appear to be the time doesn't appear to be right for that. There isn't that much support for it. So I don't think, but that was my idea, is if you were to form something and organize it so you can train auditors, because one of the things that's missing now is you're not training auditors for the most part. There's very little training, and that's what the future is going to require. So I don't think it's going to happen that way, that the independent field's going to do anything other than help give people services and keep the tech out there and active and people talking about it. And I think it's probable what's going on in the present. I wish we had more time. Maybe we can talk about it later, have some other interview but I think the current events that I'm seeing and active and researching in are what we've got going on, which is a war basically between the globalists elite and the what you might call nationalists or patriots. And I think it's very important for that war to occur and to be resolved in our favor. And if it does, I think it bodes very well for the future of Scientology, because it's going to be safe somewhere to practice. Because everything you've seen, everything you've witnessed in terms of the attacks on Dianetics back in the day, and then even the COINTELPRO operation that went on in Florida, all of these things are, they have a source, and this source traces back to these same forces that we're against now. When we talk about that, you saw on display the 7th floor of the FBI when it came to the Russiagate scandal. You saw a glimpse of it in my story, which is down in Florida, where the 7th floor. And I go more into that in my book, where the 7th floor was very active in squelching my story from coming out. So I think the future of Scientology wasn't very good before this war started, and because it looks like it's going to resolve favorably. And then that gives us a lot longer runway. Scientology has a lot longer runway. It will, in fact, that runway will outlive Miscavige. Hopefully somebody will come in and take control, or maybe sometime somebody down the road wants to take one of these independent religious organizations I put together, or make one other one, and do something independently, because the technology's out there, and that's what you and I and everybody in the independent field are in favor of. We see a difference between the institution and the actual subject matter, the religious philosophy, whatever you want to call it, self-help techniques. And that is so beneficial. I mean, I've gained so much and still gain so much from that. And I'm just one individual, that it's very important that it stay around. And I think it will. And so I think that's kind of my short summary of it.
Well, I'm just going to give you a great big old amen, brother. Appreciate that. And I'm going to wind it down here. I want to put in a plug, remind people to become patrons of Scientolopedia, to bring you, we need your support to keep bringing you this type of content and these kind of people and these kind of discussions. And also buy Merrell's book. It's called Arrows in the Dark. There's going to be a link below, whether you are hearing this on the podcast platform or on YouTube. Find his book. It's a fascinating read. It's really a historical summary, or a historical book on the days of the Church of Scientology, the Guardian's Office, and this transition period from the Sea Org, or from the Guardian's Office to the Sea Org, and everything Merrell was talking about, his story. So Merrell, thank you so much for being willing to come and talk for this period. And maybe we will do that and go, because I'd love to go into some of the current events type of thing and tie them into some of the shenanigans that you experienced with the church.
Excellent. Well, let's do it. And it's been a pleasure today. And I thank you too for that.
Well, you're welcome. And thanks again. We'll talk soon. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for joining this podcast. Stay tuned for more, or keep subscribe, and keep your eye open for more. We always want to hear from you. Give us feedback, and we'll be seeing you soon. Goodbye.